Hey everyone, welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we're going to be getting back into Chicken Soup for the Dog Lover's Soul. Stories of canine companionship, comedy, and courage. Written by multiple authors such as Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, Marty Becker, DVM, Carol Klein, Amy D. Shoja, and many more. But before we begin, I would like to ask if you guys can hit that like button and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It would mean a great deal to me if you did. And without further ado, my dear friends, we're gonna get right into it. So grab your snacks, grab your drinks, or sit back and relax, and let's get to it. When Harry met Kaatje, I might not be saying that name right. Kaatje. No matter how little money and how few possessions you own, having a dog makes you rich. Louise Sabin. December 1994, in Holland, on a business trip, I had completed my assignment and was heading home. It was early morning on a cold and rainy Saturday, and I was on my way from the hotel to Amsterdam Central Station to catch the train to the airport. Just outside the train station, I came across a homeless man. I'd seen this particular man a number of times in the past, as I traveled through Amsterdam quite often, and usually gave him some change. Many homeless people called Amsterdam Central Station their home, but this man really stuck in my head because he was always so good-natured. That day, because of the holidays, I was feeling particularly upbeat, so I handed the man 50 guilders, about $25, and wished him a Merry Christmas. With tears welling up in his eyes, he thanked me profusely for my generosity and asked my name. I told him. Mine was Dave, and he said his was Harry. We chatted briefly and went our separate ways. As I walked up to the ticket vending machine inside the train station, I reached into my wallet but found nothing. I realized that I had just given Harry the last of my money, and the bank was not yet open for currency exchange. I had no Dutch money left to buy my ticket to the airport. As I stood pondering my predicament, along came Harry. He saw me standing there bewildered and asked if I needed help with the ticket vending machine, as it was entirely in Dutch. I explained that this was not the difficulty. My actual problem was that I had no money. Without the slightest hesitation, Harry punched out the code for a ticket to the airport and deposited the change required. Out came a ticket. He handed it to me and said, "Thank you." I asked why he was thanking me when it was I who was indebted to him. He said, "Because I have been on the streets for many years. I don't have a lot of friends, and you're the first person in a long time that I have been able to help. This is why I thank you." Over the next 8 years, I continued seeing Harry at the train station when I passed through Amsterdam, which was almost every month. He usually saw me first and came over for some conversation. A number of times we had dinner together. Dinner with Harry isn't what most people think of as a normal meal. He would purchase pizza or fries from the outdoor vendors and sit on the curb to eat. Since Harry wasn't welcome in restaurants, I didn't care. I considered Harry a good friend. Then, starting in June 2002, I stopped seeing Harry. At the train station, I thought the worst. That Harry, even though he was fairly young and healthy, had probably frozen to death or been killed. In early 2003, I was in Amsterdam for my monthly visit. It was 5:30 on the Saturday morning, and I was on my way to the train station. Suddenly, I heard a voice yell, "Hey, Dave!" I turned to see a clean-shaven, casually dressed gentleman walking a medium-sized brown and white collie-type dog. Then, they were coming my way. I had no idea who this person was. He walked up to me, shook my hand, and said, "It's me, Harry." I was in complete shock. I couldn't believe it. I had never seen the man without raggedy clothes and layers of dirt all over himself. Now he looked like a completely respectable man. He began to tell me the story of where he had been for the last several months. It all began with the dog he was now walking. Kaatje, his new companion, had just shown up one day and started hanging out with him at the train station. He and the dog lived on the street for a few months until one day Kaatje was run over by a car. Harry rushed the dog to a vet who informed him that the cost of surgery to repair the dog's hip was going to be very expensive. Harry, of course, had no money. The vet made Harry an offer. If he performed the operation, Harry would take up residence on a cot in the back of the vet's office and work for him by watching the dogs during the night shift until the surgery was paid off. Harry readily accepted the offer. Kaatje came through the hip surgery with flying colors. Harry kept his end of the bargain because he was so kind to the animals and was such a good worker. When the bill was paid off, the vet offered Harry a permanent position. With a steady salary, Harry was able to get an apartment for himself and Kaatje. Harry was no longer homeless. His love for Kaatje had rescued him from the streets. He stood before me now, looking like any pleasant young man out for a walk with his dog on a Saturday morning. It was time to catch my train. Harry and I shook hands, and Kaatje gave me a nice goodbye face wash. "Let's get together the next time I'm in Amsterdam," I said. "I'd like that," Harry said with a warm smile. We made plans to meet for dinner near the train station on my next trip and parted ways. Just before going into the train station, I turned so I could watch man and dog walking happily back to a place people sometimes take for granted, a place called home. Dave Wiley. Aw, that's really sweet. The next story is called Gremlin, Dog First Class. In the spring of 1943, a detachment of 7 planes from the VPB-128 U.S. Navy Bombing Squadron was sent to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where a German submarine had been sighted. The weather was hot and humid. Most of the pilots and crew were young men, away from home for the first time. Many were homesick. All were afraid. Just a few months earlier, they all had been civilians in different walks of life. Now they were sailors struggling to survive war. One day around lunchtime, one of the aircraft crews was seeking shade underneath the wing of their plane when they spotted what appeared to be a half-starved rat trotting into their direction. As the animal neared them, they saw that it was a small dog. The dog was so undernourished that his ribs were clearly visible through his thin brown and white fur. "Come here, boy," one of the sailors called. The dog stopped in his tracks and stared. Eyeing the protruding ribs, the sailor was filled with compassion and offered the dog his sandwich. At first, the dog seemed reluctant, his brown eyes fearful, but he was so hungry he couldn't resist. With his head down and tail between his legs, the little dog inched forward, then gobbled down the sandwich. It took several days and a lot of sandwiches before the dog trusted the men enough to follow them into the mess hall, where he indulged in military chow, fresh oranges, boiled eggs, and spam. The dog learned to love the enlisted personnel, who gave him their undivided attention, and although he tolerated the officers, the sailors noticed that he had no love for civilians. The dog would study civilians from a distance, but closely monitor them if they approached him. If they got too close, he would bare his teeth and growl. It was assumed that the dog had been so abused by civilians that he could never forget it, and after investigating to make sure he was a stray, the men decided to keep him. When the detachment was ordered back to the squadron, the sailors couldn't stand leaving the dog behind, so they smuggled him on board an aircraft. Shortly after taking off, the dog barked as the men began playing with him. The pilot asked, "What is that noise?" The radio man replied, "It must be a gremlin, sir." According to the dictionary, gremlin means a mischievous, invisible imp that said to ride in airplanes and cause mechanical trouble. The dog barked again, and the men had to come clean. They took him to the cockpit, where he was enthusiastically welcomed by the rest of the crew. "This must be our gremlin, sir," the radio man said, and the name stuck. Gremlin was indoctrinated into the U.S. Navy when the squadron returned to New York. Induction papers were signed with a paw print, and he was issued an ID card and dog tag. A crew member donated a dress blue uniform jacket from which a cape was cut and attached to a harness. The uniform bore the insignia, "Dog, First Class," and Gremlin seemed very proud to wear his uniform. He was also issued Air Combat Crew wings and eventually earned several campaign ribbons, all attached to the uniform. Gremlin seemed to sense that his uniform was special and would stand at attention during the squadron's infrequent personnel inspections and would move only when the unit was dismissed. He usually slept with the enlisted personnel and was completely house and plane broken, never relieving himself while in quarters or in flight. However, immediately upon landing, like all crew members, he searched for a place of privacy. Gremlin soon became the most popular member of the VPB-128 and often flew on non-contact missions with his human counterparts. Gremlin's Navy career took him to 5 of the world's 7 continents: North America, Europe, Africa, South America, and Asia, in that order. Gremlin had several primary caretakers, some of whom lost their lives during the course of the war. When that happened, another sailor was always ready to take over tending to the dog. While many dogs are enthusiastic automobile riders, Gremlin loved airplanes. At the first turn of the prop of the PV-1 bomber, he would spin in circles, bark loudly, wag his tail furiously, and strain against the wind of the prop, his ears and cape flapping in the wind, reminding the men that he wanted to go too. Once Gremlin disappeared during a short stay At the Midway Island, rumor had it that one of the submarine crew members had picked up the dog and taken him to their base on the neighboring island. The skipper realized this would be a great loss, and Morrow would no doubt suffer. He sent 3 squadron aircraft crews over to find him, but the submarine had left, probably with Gremlin aboard. The men kept searching and calling for their beloved friend. Hope dwindled with each passing moment. Then, one man saw a small mass huddled under a park bench. It was Gremlin, but he was shaking and wouldn't come when called. The sailor quickly gathered the dog up and yelled to the rest of the searchers, "I found him!" The men came running. It seemed too good to be true. But there he was. They stroked the frightened dog and spoke softly to him. Finally, Gremlin began wagging his tail. He was back where he belonged, with the VPB-128. When the squadron was sent to Samar, a hot spot in the war zone, the men had to spend most of their time concentrating on the enemy. Gremlin didn't seem to mind. It was almost as if he understood their purpose for being there, and he was content so long as he was with the sailors. It was in Samar that an enlisted man by the name of McCurdy assumed primary care of Gremlin. McCurdy, with his crew, was ordered to was ordered on a follow-up attack of a Japanese submarine tied up to the dock at Cebu City. McCurdy's plane was shot down and fell, flaming into the water. At that time, bombers carried so much gasoline that even a slight crash or hit would cause the plane to burst into flames. Several planes went down that day, and many members of the VPB-128 lost their lives. There was a lot of confusion in the days that followed the loss of McCurdy's plane, but someone finally noticed that Gremlin hadn't been seen for a while. They finally realized that Gremlin had been on that plane. The brave and loyal dog had gone out on his last mission. Gremlin, dog first class, rescued from a life of hunger and abuse in the slums of Cuba, and brought into the world filled with love, unending attention and adventure, died for his country and the men he loved on March 21st, 1944. He accomplished his mission with the highest degree of loyalty, compassion, and love. Jalen Boltman Deardruff. Wow. That's incredible. May they rest in peace. And may we thank them for the service that they did for our country, for us, even little Gremlin. That is where we're going to leave it, my dear friends. May you all have a wonderful morning, noon, afternoon, or night whenever this video reaches you. This has been Ruby, signing off.